Well, it's great to have speeches that actually hold your attention when you have to sit on the stage, and this was a wonderful bunch of speeches to follow. My name is David Swanson, the supposed glue that holds the peace movement together. It's a long process. There's elastic involved.
You don't look sticky.
So who decides about war and who should decide about war? Of course, two very, very different questions. Who does decide about war? Obviously, we've touched on many of them. The corporate media cartel, the weapons companies, the permanent government bureaucrats, the president. The president simply by announcing a war on terror, the president through misspending, through lying, through simply acting, and through signing treaties for 3 years of war with occupied countries, for that matter. The party discipline of the two parties, the culture that Joe Biden lives in, where he can say something like, as a sovereign state, Israel has the right to attack Iran, as something uncontroversial to anyone he ever spends any time talking to. The soldiers who obey illegal orders. And the culture that leads kids to that place, and apparently the governor of Oregon, and many other people decide about war. Who should decide about war? We, the people of the world, through democratically created and enforced international and national and state laws. And not a president, not partially, not in a balanced manner, not sharing responsibility, not at all. And the Constitution is stronger on this point than the War Powers Act. This division, of course, between who should decide and who does actually decide is complicated when we look at, well, what do the laws actually say in order to try to enforce laws that are not being enforced. But I think sometimes we give too much weight to that, because laws that have been violated for decades can be as hard to enforce as laws that have not been written yet. However, getting old laws enforced and new laws created has to be part of our strategy. And so I have my doubts about a topic that has not yet been brought up, but the idea of public referenda on wars. For one thing, because with the corrupted communication system we've got, the public would have voted to attack Iraq. Now, if the public could have been forced to reauthorize annually, we might have only been there 1 year, but we would have been there at least that 1 year. Nonetheless, that initial invasion would have been illegal and immoral and catastrophic, although publicly approved. With a better communication system and an election finance system and party system and voting system and congressional checks on presidential power, in other words, with everything we need in order to control our Congress and create public referenda on wars or anything else that we need to create, without all of that, we're unlikely to establish a referenda on wars as something we have the power to do. And if we're making exceptions for defensive wars, that is to say legal wars, then why should we vote the illegal ones up or down? Why not, given our hypothetical ability to control the Congress, deter the war criminals through impeachments, including the impeachment of attorneys general who will not prosecute them? And limiting Congress's role to approving or disapproving of aggressive wars, which I loved everything in your remarks, Benson, but the way I read the recommendations in this report is essentially to limit Congress's role to approving or disapproving of the aggressive wars. I don't think that gets us very far either. So how do we, the people, get the power to decide about war, if not through voting them up or down? Number one, through education, through exactly what we're doing today, through the websites, through the radio shows, through the books, through the educational initiatives by groups like these, through counter-recruitment, which is being done very well as regards the military. But as we heard from Jeremy Scahill today, if we don't have counter-recruitment of mercenary recruitment, we're fighting a losing battle. Through systemic reforms, including restoring all but the Third Amendment, Right? The Third Amendment is the one they haven't destroyed in the past 8 years, because this was the one that said you can't be forced to house soldiers in your homes. So of course we've built homes for the soldiers. By forcing our representatives in the House of Representatives to reclaim and accept power on our behalf that they do not want, by forcing them to use the power of the purse, by forcing them to use the powers of impeachment and inherent contempt. Inherent contempt means when you subpoena someone, which now they're too terrified to even do, you don't then ask the Justice Department to enforce your subpoena. You use the Capitol Police. Many people in this room are familiar intimately with the Capitol Police. There are jail cells. They can be used. Not just for us. When Senator Leahy says to Jay Bybee, would you mind coming in? And Jay Bybee says, go Cheney yourself. And Senator Leahy says, okay. They have a Capitol Police force. We know it. Barbara Lee was right on Thursday when she and 21 other members of Congress put in a bill that said not a dime for an escalation in Afghanistan. This is the approach. She was almost right. She was almost right because a bill has to pass the Senate, which is a ridiculous challenge to take on. But if you can use a bill to organize people who are then going to vote no on the so-called defense appropriation and on the next supplemental for wars, then that is the most likely chance we have. But John McCain was also right when John McCain said a general who's running a war should be brought in and questioned by the United States Congress. And the twisted state of affairs we're in, where senators are such cowards that they cannot imagine besting a general in a conversation, much less using the power of the purse, leads to this idea that letting a president decide everything, and then we'll talk to the generals about it, is actually anti-war. It's absurd, absolutely absurd. John McCain has outrageous motivations. He has no interest in restoring the power of Congress. He wants to escalate the war, but what he said was technically exactly right. We need testimony from the war makers now, and we need testimony from recent war criminals. We also need to hold war criminals accountable through national, state, local, civil, foreign, and international suits. If you don't hold them accountable, you don't deter repetition and continuation. We need to start thinking of 3 branches rather than 2 parties. We need to get rid of loyalty in their minds and ours, 2 parties, and get it 4 branches. The people who wanted the Congress to end Bush's wars want to leave Obama alone for his wars and argue that Congress has no right to interfere, the very same people. By exposing the lies that the Congress debated 7 years ago this week. They were obvious lies then. They've long since been exposed by a whole arsenal of smoking guns, but we have to continue. The New York Times, the Washington Post to this day, this week, are pushing the idea that we never could have known any better. These weren't lies, honest mistakes, and so forth. We have to continue that relentlessly. By restoring to Congress the power to make laws, to make wars, to make treaties, to make appointments, and to spend all public dollars. By dismantling the empire of bases and the military-industrial media CIA complex, including the banning of any U.S. military presence in foreign nations. By amending the War Powers Act, not to weaken it, but to disallow war without Congress, as stated in the Constitution, to require annual reauthorization of any war, and to make violations impeachable offenses and felonies. Not to make the Congress into consultants. And by instituting a fair draft in times of war. By making war profiteering a major felony and banning the ownership of war companies by elected officials.
Yes.
By banning all use of mercenaries. By passing Congresswoman McCollum's Acorn Act against corporations organizing to rip off the nation, which would defund our largest war profiteers, the biggest weapons makers, the ones making thousands of times from our government what Acorn has ever dreamed of, and Acorn, of course, has not been convicted of any felonies. And by passing Congressman McGoverns' plan, now 100 co-sponsors, Congressman McGoverns' bill which would require the president to produce an exit plan, any exit plan for Afghanistan, by banning war propaganda, by banning many recruitment ads, by banning places like the Army Experience Center in a shopping mall outside of Philadelphia to teach our kids that killing is fun. This is not the First Amendment any more than corporate bribes are the First Amendment. By requiring, this one some people are going to argue with, and I welcome that, but let's talk about it. By requiring that the family members, the children and the grandchildren of presidents and Congress members who decide to take us into aggressive wars serve in the most dangerous positions in those wars. Not because I want them to, but because we would not have these wars then. By limiting, take a random number, but it's a drastic change from where we are now. By limiting to 25% the portion of the public budget that can go to the military and wars, and by requiring a balanced budget, and by placing on a separate line on your income tax forms the dollars going to the military and wars. By requiring free, comprehensive health care and education be provided to all military veterans. And on Monday, October 5th, joining me and thousands of people at the White House, 10 o'clock at McPherson Square, at noon we march to the White House on Monday. We can do something. We spend all Saturday talking. We're going to do something on Monday. Be prepared to go to jail. It's much more fun if you go to jail. But the more of us are there, the less likely they are to arrest anybody. Which means we can shut down streets, we can shut down sidewalks, we can block entrances and exits to the White House. And the more people are there to non-violently take part, feel free to come out and just wave a poster and shout and chant and talk to people. But if you want to do more, I strongly encourage it, and this is a good chance to say we don't want a ninth year in Afghanistan. We may be a crowd of hundreds or thousands. We speak for the majority of Americans. And I'll leave it there, but I want to abuse my possession of the microphone to throw a question to Ben, whose presentation was so educational for me, and that is to bring up the use of militia in the Second Amendment, which some historians maintain was put in there for slave owners, militias being the tool to hold slaves in southern states. And the abuse of that amendment now to make it as easy to get a gun as an ice cream cone. And can we talk about militias in the Constitution separately from militias in the Second Amendment? I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Can you give us that list you just read off?
Go later to afterdowningstreet.org, or to find out about what we're doing on Monday, go right now to nogoodwar.org.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we heard from all of our speakers, and we're going to open up the floor to questions. And I think the way we did it last night was we took 3 questions, and then if you wanted to address it to a specific person, you could, or maybe each panelist would want to answer it. So we can start with a show of hands. Yes.
There are a lot of things going on Capitol Hill, but it seems to me I've heard very little about the group of progressive and peace-minded individuals in Congress who have